as we typically do in the past, have done the same. Our keynote speaker might not be quite in line with what the rest of the technical presentations follow, but we like to broaden the spectrum of what is discussed, and we always include someone a bit out of the box, and Natalie did a perfect job to encapsulate that. So thank you again, once again, for your support and for your continued help in our efforts. I would like now to take the opportunity to pass the baton to Chris Fernando, that has been helping us put together the panels. Yesterday's panel did a tremendous job, and I'm sure that today's panel is going to be equally as impressive. So at this point, Chris, if you are online and if we can call you in the panel, I will leave it up to you to introduce the individuals, and I will sit back. If you need it, just let me know. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate the handoff. Good afternoon, everyone in Portugal and in Europe, and good morning to those in the United States. And hello to everyone around the world. Welcome to the panelists. I think we're missing or waiting on Lisa to join us, who should join us shortly, but we can get started since we have 30 minutes of kind of a bit of a bio of each of our speakers, as well as a few minutes of their perspectives and engagement on emerging aviation technologies. Lots of excitement in the industry. We are in unprecedented times, and it's nice to talk about a topic that generates some excitement for aviation and the industry at large. So my name is Chris Fernando. I'm the principal of aviation at Quantitative Scientific Solutions based in Arlington, Virginia. And I've been in the aviation industry for almost 20 years, around 10 of those in the airport space, and the last eight or so, I've been supporting the FAA and NASA on various research efforts. But today is not about me. It's about the amazing panelists that we have who will share their views and thoughts and have a great discussion, hopefully, after the first 30 minutes, where we will go around the horn and have them speak and share some of their experiences. And then the next 30 minutes, we'll have a discussion, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A amongst the group. So today I have, very quickly, Lisa Elmer, who's a partner at Hogan Lovells, which is a law firm, a global law firm, and she's also the executive director of the Commercial Drone Alliance. We have Maria Tarabanovska. Sorry about that. Your last name's a little bit tricky. She is based in the UK, and she's a co-founder of Flight Forward. We have Tom Davis, who's the vice president of Crown Consulting. Gretchen West, who's the president and CEO of Schiebo Aircraft in the United States, or North America, I think. Fred Judson, director of Ohio UAS Center. Felipe Varun, who is the CEO and founder of Varun Vehicles, and I believe you're based right now in Colombia, but I'm not certain. You will have to confirm that when it's your turn. So since Lisa is not here, Maria, I'm going to start with you and have you introduce yourself and spend a few minutes talking about the UK perspective, Flight Forward, and kind of your thoughts on the industry.
Hey, Chris. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Just a quick one. So my name is Maria Tarabanovska, and it's not Flight Forward, it's Flight Crowd. That's okay, that's fine, you forgive it. Yeah, so just a bit about myself. So I'm an aerospace engineer by education, but I'm currently working in the space of urban or advanced air mobility. And despite my very classical, traditional engineering background, I got very interested in the drone technology and later in the eVTOL and the UAM space. And fast forward, once a part of an initiative that organized the first UK Urban Air Mobility Summit, I later worked on numerous projects with individuals and organizations, both private and publicly funded, as well as developed a thesis with the University of Manchester, all looking at the implementation of urban air mobility on a mass scale. My experience ranges from very much hands-on drone design and development to advisory and business cases of how to implement UAM in various parts of the world. My most recent project, called Flight Crowd, is an initiative looking at shaping public perception and public acceptance of the eVTOL vehicles, and by various communities around the world. And we understand that despite the very fast-paced environment that the industry is operating in, unfortunately, only a small minority of the global community is aware or indeed is supportive of this developing technology. At Flight Crowd, we really want to change that. We want to make sure that the public is aware and comfortable and happy with the mass-scale eVTOL aircraft implementation, and they know that UAM can definitely positively impact our life. We so far had a fantastic response, not only from the UK-based companies, but government-backed initiatives, as well as a number of organizations from the US, Canada, Australia, Norway, Italy, just to name a few. We're very excited for what's ahead and always keen to collaborate, so do please reach out and so we can help make UAM a reality that is welcomed by all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Sorry, I'm off to a bad start with you, so I'll have to make it up through the course of the session. Next on my screen is Mr. Tom Davis. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, so good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I wish we could all be together in Portugal. I've been there before. It's a beautiful country. My aunt actually owns a home in the Algarve, and I'd rather be there than here in the U.S. right now. But in any case, my background is that I worked for the NASA Ames Research Center in California for 36 years. I began as an individual contributor, researcher, then project leader. The last 10 or so years of my career, I managed a division that was focused on aerospace automation. I would say for most of my career focused on sort of traditional or commercial aerospace automation. We developed a number of systems that have, reached implementation in the US. But over the last 10 years or so, nearly everybody, I think on this panel, probably everybody and many in the audience will know somebody by the name of PK or Dr. Koperdecker, who grew up in that division and created the UTM concept while he worked in that division, and it's now something that we all say very easily. Later, as I said, later in my career, we began to shift our focus towards UAS or UAVs, and then about that time I retired from NASA and became the vice president of Crown Consulting. Crown, which was about 4 years ago. Crown is a moderately sized consulting company based out of Washington, D.C. that does a lot of work for NASA, so I still am engaged heavily with the people that I used to work with and for, and with me at NASA. We have pivoted primarily to doing advanced air mobility things. We led one of the two studies that NASA conducted to try and decide whether or not this was an area that they wanted to invest in. Was it real? Was it really important for them to invest research dollars in it? By the way, Chris led the other one at Booz Allen Hamilton at the time. Both studies reached different but similar conclusions that yes, this was a viable space, and in varying ways NASA should invest. And I would say at this point NASA is sort of whole hog invested into it. Probably over half of their aeronautics research portfolio is focused on advanced air mobility. We do some of that work. I'll talk about it as we go through the panel. We also do work for in the United States state departments of transportation and even cities in some cases. And we're doing a little bit of work or beginning to do a little bit of work in Canada. So I think I'll stop there. One last story. I feel kind of lucky. I mentioned PK. In my career, my life began during the Apollo space era. And that was a really exciting time that inspired many of us in my age group. Our teachers used to wheel the launches and the recoveries on the TV into our classroom. But we had this cartoon called The Jetsons that we used to watch. And of course, as my career gets a little bit more mature, let's say, we're beginning now to see that come to fruition. And so I feel like I was born at the perfect time to be able to see Apollo and Mercury and Gemini, and now be able to see the Jetsons come to life. So it's a very exciting time, and I feel very fortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's a tough act to follow, but if anyone can follow Tom, it's probably Lisa. So, Lisa, you're up.
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with you, even if it has to be virtual. I was really looking forward to coming to Portugal, but that'll, I guess just have to happen next year. I hope everyone is healthy and well, and really looking forward to this conversation today. So my name is Lisa Elmer. Thank you for that introduction, Chris, and great to be here with so many familiar faces on this panel. My background, I came to unmanned aircraft systems from the federal government side, so from the policymaking side. My background is working both at the White House as well as at the Department of Justice here in the United States. This was very early days. I actually remember first getting handed a folder that said UAS back in 2009, when, obviously the FAA here in the US was focused on UAS or knew of UAS and was aware that, this was coming, but the rest of the federal government hadn't really focused on it yet. And fast forward a few years, in 2013, I was working at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I was focusing on emerging technologies and integrating emerging technologies with our policymaking when I was asked to go run drones policy at the Department of Justice and lead kind of the DOJ interagency efforts working with the White House and with other agencies on integrating the airspace. Here in the US, Congress in 2012 had mandated, given the great safety and efficiency benefits of commercial drones, that in public use of drones and that the airspace be integrated. But again, the whole of the federal government hadn't really focused on it at that point. And now all of a sudden it was a congressional mandate. And, we were tasked with trying to figure out how to do this. So I still remember our first meeting at the White House. We sat around the conference table and there was a whiteboard, and it was like, the question was just, what does this mean? Like, how do we, what does it mean to have drones flying over people, over structures or next to structures, next to helicopters, undermanned aircraft, how, next to other drones? How do we make this a reality and do this in a way that is safe, that is secure, and that is protective of the public's privacy? And so I really saw from inside of government what an exciting new industry this was going to be. And I was really, really, fascinated by it. And I recognized after a year or two that I could probably do more to help the industry and help this whole ecosystem move forward from the outside. And so from the outside of government. So I left in 2014 and launched a global drones practice group, a global UAS practice group at a law firm, and as well as teamed up with our co-panelist Gretchen West to launch an independent nonprofit called Commercial Drone Alliance. I kind of wear two hats, but in my role at Hogan Lovells Law Firm, I work with companies of all stripes, or organizations, universities, and others that are interested in drones, that want to use drones commercially, that are worried about drone security issues, that are getting into the urban air mobility or advanced air mobility space. Most of our work focuses on either enabling commercial drones, drone security, or UAM. That's kind of the three buckets I would put it in. And then on the CDA side, we represent the industry broadly. I'm hired from Hogan Lovells to be the executive director now of the Commercial Drone Alliance, which, as I said, Gretchen and I launched together back in 2015, 2016 now. I guess it's been a little while. And our focus is on moving the commercial drone industry forward. So, both on the individual client side as well as on an industry broadly side, very engaged on all of the policy and regulatory and legal happenings. It's obviously incredibly fast moving, as you all know. It's a really exciting space. I get to work with amazing innovators and entrepreneurs who are looking to do amazing things, and we're trying to make that a reality. And so, obviously from the Commercial Drone Alliance side, we're really focused on trying to open up the airspace on expanded operations. We'll talk a bit about the regulatory frameworks and where some of the pitfalls have been. Here in the U.S., as in many countries around the world, the technology has really far outpaced the policy. And so that's the challenge for all of us collectively, is to figure out how do we close that gap and move the whole ecosystem forward by educating policymakers, educating regulators, and bringing the technologies to bear in order to solve some of these policy problems, which I know we're going to talk about today. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Lisa. Next on my screen is Mr. Fred Judson from this Ohio DOT. Over to you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Hey, just to echo to what Tom was saying about the Jetsons, an old cartoon that aired several years ago. My last name typically now gets turned in from Judson to Jetson. It used to be made fun of when I was a kid as that too, but now I actually own it. It actually works out well. So Fred Judson, I'm the director of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Center for Ohio. My professional background 10 years ago was in geographic information systems. So I saw the small unmanned aircraft systems for data collection as a way that we could get, almost real time or on demand information. So, but little did I know the kind of hoops that you had to jump through to put something like that in the air. Fast forward that till now, and now I'm the director of the UAS Center. And so the last 8 years, I've been promoting advanced air mobility technologies for the state of Ohio. We did start out with the small unmanned aircraft systems, but in 2016, we started seeing some of these large aircraft come online and started realizing how that's going to actually change the landscape in Ohio. So we initiated a lot of different programs in support of not just the smalls, but the large aircraft as well. As the Department of Transportation, we use the smalls to do condition assessments on our infrastructure for our ground transportation system. But then we look at the larger aircraft for the movement of people and goods and what that actually is going to mean for the state of Ohio. So it's our job as the transportation department for the state of Ohio is to make sure that we're ready for all these new technologies. And so we've implemented several different projects in order to help facilitate those different efforts within the state. One being our SkyVision asset that sits at our Springfield-Beckley Airport. That helps deconflict the airspace so we can fly any unmanned aircraft of any size beyond line of sight. And that was in partnership with our Air Force Research Labs out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So, it's coming from a data background and jumping into aviation, it's been quite an adventure. And I am happy to own the Jetsons if my name does get turned into that. But that's a little bit of my background and some of the efforts that we have in Ohio.
Awesome. Thanks, Fred. I'll try not to call you Jetson. Gretchen, you're up next.
There we go. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Anyway, thank you again for the invitation to participate here today. I'm glad to be part of this panel. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I kind of echo everybody's comments about how exciting this is and wishing we could all be in Portugal right now, but we'll make do with what we have. I'm Gretchen West. I'm the president and CEO of Schiebel Aircraft. We're a subsidiary of Schiebel in Europe and the UAE. I've been in this industry a little over 15 years, so I feel like the Jetsons really resonates with me. Back 15 years ago when all of this was was kind of starting, when the FAA and the federal government was starting to look at this technology is kind of when I got involved. And back then it was really mostly large aircraft that were being used by the military. I started out with a large trade association called AUVSI. I was the executive vice president. I was there for about 10 years. And so we focused on all sorts of different things, from policy to kind of global awareness about these technologies. We worked with a lot of the defense companies around the world and really just trying to kind of get this technology more recognized. We started working with Congress. We started working with the federal government. We started working with the FAA way back in the day when they were kind of looking at creating language with Congress to kind of actually address this type of technology. And then it wasn't until many years later when we saw this big shift to, small UAS and all these commercial applications. So after AUVSI, I actually worked with PK, as Tom mentioned, on some things like UTM. There were some other efforts that NASA was looking at to really help kind of push forward integration of these technologies. And then, I don't even know how long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, Lisa and I had met, and we both had real passion about getting this industry kind of moving beyond the barriers that, regulatory, privacy, public acceptance, all of these different things. And so I joined up with her at Hogan Lovells as part of the global UAS practice group, and again worked with lots of clients. And then Lisa mentioned the Commercial Drone Alliance. We formed that because we felt that there wasn't really an organization that was truly representing the commercial companies, not just the manufacturers or the software developers, but the end users. So energy companies or real estate agents or whatever kind of end user that was looking to use this technology. A lot of the end users just didn't understand the value. And so that's why we formed the Commercial Drone Alliance, because we really wanted to help those end users. Because without the end users, if they're not adopting the technology, then there is no commercial drone industry. And at the time when we formed the organization, there was a lot of concern about public perception. Oil and gas companies were concerned about using this technology. What if it wasn't reliable? What if what were the regulatory burdens? And now I think we've seen greater adoption, but I think, as we all know, there still is a lot of challenges out there. From a regulatory standpoint, privacy, all of those issues still exist. And so I'm now, as Schiebel Aircraft, a member of the Commercial Drone Alliance, and really looking to push forward this technology. I'll talk just briefly about Schiebel. So again, I mentioned I'm a U.S. subsidiary of the parent company, and Schiebel develops a VTOL aircraft. It's about 200 kilograms, so it's medium sized. It's not small. It's not a toy. It's mostly used by militaries around the world. We do a lot of maritime surveillance. We fly off ships looking for things in the ocean, drug traffickers, things like that. We do a lot of surveillance. We have the capability to carry a lot of different types of payloads. So most of the history of the organization is with the military, but we're also shifting and looking at the commercial markets, because I think some of the larger commercial markets, such as the energy sector, have realized that this technology is very valuable. But if you have a small UAS that can only fly for 45 minutes, really the value isn't there. And so I think they're starting to look at more robust technologies that can fly, 6 to 10 hours, which is what we can do. And so that's kind of where we're kind of focusing now. We're still working with the government, but we're also looking at the commercial markets. We've recently demonstrated cargo carrying capability, or cargo resupply, which obviously is, I think has become a very hot topic across the government, across commercial markets. We're not looking at consumer delivery, but we are looking at that cargo carrying capability. So, I think as part of this discussion today, we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a manufacturer's perspective about the market, the interest, and also kind of our challenges with the regulatory environment kind of globally. So excited to dive into the conversation. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Gretchen. And last but not least, Felipe from Colombia is going to introduce himself.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here in the Portugal Air Summit. Hello to everybody. My name is Felipe Varun. I am the founder and CEO of Varun Vehicles. It's great to be joining this fantastic panel, all the great panelists here. Hello to everyone. We call ourselves a disruptive infrastructure company, and we do that because we try to see urban air mobility from the city perspective, from the urban point of view. And in that sense, urban air mobility for us is a way to solve city growth problems, the mobility infrastructure problems. And yes, we are focused in Latin America. Let me tell you a bit about myself. It all started for me about more than 20 years ago, when as an engineering student, I merged together two different passions of mine. One was the passion for flight, and the other one was a passion for electronics, for control systems and robotics. And that turned out to be an idea about a new way to fly, a new way to achieve flight that was way simpler. Back then, we didn't have a name for these devices that had simple motors distributed around them and electronics doing the flight and the control for them. We used to call them flying platforms. It was about over a decade later that they were popularly known as drones. But back then, it was clear to me all the different applications that these devices would have in agriculture, in cinematography and defense, and law enforcement, and so many others that are proving today to be an extremely mature industry, actually. But the vision I had back then was that once these devices would be able to exist and to become larger, that they would eventually become the flying cars of the future, that these would eventually be the devices that would allow us to solve those problems that we have in such an endemic form in Latin America, but so clearly in a persistent way globally. Traffic problems, the pollution problems, these are really evident today. And it was clear to me back then that these devices would offer those opportunities. And today, those technologies that come from the drone industry are precisely those enabling technologies that are allowing us to create urban air mobility. So fast forward to today, I have a background in defense, with military technologies. I've worked for over 18 years with unmanned aerial systems, different robotic systems in underwater, land, and air, both tactical and strategic types of unmanned aerial systems. And some 4+ years, I founded the company Varun Vehicles, and we are focused in Latin America in implementing urban air mobility. Now, we are leading an urban air mobility ecosystem in Latin America, where we're bringing together all sorts of different players from the world urban air mobility industry, from air vehicle OEMs to subsystems providers, the airborne systems like powertrains, flight computers, and so on, to aerospace integration system companies, ground subsystems like power generation, vertiport designers and architect firms, mobility experts, all the way to investors and regulators. And our purpose, our end purpose, is to actually implement urban air mobility systems to provide those transportation services. And I'm really looking forward to talking in this panel about that implementation, the details about why we see an advantage in Latin America for the first implementations of urban air mobility, and more details on that. So looking forward to the conversation. Over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Felipe. So for the next 57 minutes and 35 seconds, we're going to talk about kind of four main themes amongst the panel and have a discussion. It won't be a Q&A. I hope it won't be a Q&A. So we have three great perspectives: the U.S. perspective that I'm sure our guests in Europe and Portugal want to hear about. We do have the UK perspective and potentially the European perspective from Maria. And of course, as Felipe mentioned, the Latin American perspective. And then we will move into kind of the regulatory challenges. Lisa touched on her background and experience, and Gretchen as well. But we have Fred, who's kind of implementing it on the ground. So it'll be great to kind of learn from all three of them. Of course, all of you probably can weigh in on the regulatory challenges. And then one of the areas that I always enjoy talking about is the public perception piece, which is important if people don't like to get into these aircraft, especially the AAM, UAM aircraft. There won't be a business or a market for it. So the public perception piece will be an interesting discussion. And then we'll wrap up with the workforce of the future and touch on some of the other emerging new entrants like supersonic and commercial space. And as I mentioned before, we are in unprecedented times. The aviation industry is hurting, airlines are hurting, airports are hurting. This is a bit of a silver lining coming through. But one thing that's important for us, the panelists and the industry, is to think about what the workforce of the future needs to look like for these technologies, but also how the current workforce that's struggling, has been furloughed, laid off, can start learning and adding tools to their toolkit to kind of take on some of these new challenges. So with that, I'm going to ask Tom Davis, who has kind of a very broad overview perspective of the U.S. ecosystem and has been involved in, as you heard, with various programs. I'm hoping, Tom, you give us the story of Neil Armstrong, hanging out with Neil Armstrong at some point during the next hour. But over to you, Tom, to kind of touch on maybe the IPP program and some of the NASA initiatives.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And I'll try to remember on the Neil Armstrong thing, although it's hard to forget. So there really are, a number of significant initiatives in the U.S. You're going to hear in a little bit from Fred Judson in Ohio, which is one of our states that is probably either on or very near the leading edge of investment and attempting to begin to implement. But I won't touch on that because Fred's got way more to say about it and a lot better stuff to say than I would. I'll begin with about 2.5 years ago, the FAA implemented by a presidential memorandum something called the UAS Integration Pilot Program, or IPP. And basically it invited entities across the U.S. to apply for a focused program within that, or a focused set of projects within that. I think there were something like 140 applicants. 10 were ultimately chosen. It's now down to 9. One realized fairly early that they couldn't keep up with the pace or have the investment to be able to do it. But the bottom line is there's 9 active ones. They're doing all kinds of things with small UAS, including package delivery. There's a really cool law enforcement application in California that's gotten a lot of press. Infrastructure inspection, energy inspection, airport security. There's in Reno, Nevada, they're trying to deliver AEDs for emergency situations by drone. There's airport runway inspection and a number of other things. But all of those, the FAA basically spread those out across the 9 teams to try and get as many different use cases as they could and to get a taste for where the problems would be. And of course, everybody knew that regulatory issues were going to be near the top, but the hope has been that by getting a little more attention from the FAA, because these entities get to go to the front of the line for getting permission or waivers to do certain things, by getting a little more attention and trying things that maybe were a little outside the box, they begin to learn enough information to begin changing the regulations or writing new rules. There's been a lot of different things attempted, and most of them successfully, including operations over people, including moving traffic. Most of the entities have flown beyond visual line of sight, in most cases with visual observers or some kind of significant technology that's geared towards a specific use case, that doesn't necessarily let them go far beyond line of sight, but maybe out of the sight of the pilot. There have been so far three companies that have achieved Part 135 status. Two of them, the first two under the IPP, Google Wing, and then UPS, and then much recently, Amazon has achieved that too, but they're not part of the IPP. And Part 135 in the U.S. gives you the authority to operate basically a drone airline. You can have unscheduled delivery of things when you have your Part 135 certificate. There are at least 3 other entities that are nearing Part 135 certification, but they're not quite there yet. And there may be more than that. There's 3 that I know of. They're also focused on aircraft certification. For these small UAS, none have achieved it yet. That's not necessarily to blame the drone makers themselves. The FAA has struggled, I think, a little bit with getting the system to certify those aircraft fully in line and ready to go, but they've learned a lot from the IPP to where they probably are on a pretty good track to do that. There's a number of vehicles that have been used in the IPP that are getting closer and closer to certification. I personally have been supporting the North Carolina DOT IPP team. We've done some really cool things here. We have 3 cities in the state of North Carolina now with routine medical package delivery. These include medical tests, pharmaceuticals that have a very short shelf life and need to get, let's say, across a medical campus very quickly. And then in the case of one of our partners, Zipline. So UPS is one partner. Zipline, who operates in Rwanda with blood delivery, is another. They're delivering PPE and other materials in response to COVID in the Charlotte area here in the state. And they are flying about 14 miles in each direction. They are using visual observers, but there's an awful lot of airspace coordination. We're told it's the first approved waiver in the U.S. in controlled airspace, flying in what we call the Mode C veil. We also have achieved a beyond line of sight bridge inspection waiver, which allows the drone to go underneath the bridge, out of the sight of the pilot, and take images under the bridge. It's made by a company called Skydio. It has some very unique sensors that allow it to do that without bumping into the bridge. So that's hopefully going to reduce inspection times here in the state. So those are the use cases that have been enabled here. Oh, there's one more. There's a food delivery case that's just beginning to start up in one of our smaller cities in the state. As far as NASA goes, as I said earlier, and maybe I should have begun with them since that's where my home is, so to speak, but NASA commissioned a couple of large studies, one by Booz Allen Hamilton that Chris led, another one by Crown that I helped lead. These were geared towards trying to assess how ready the industry was to go to market, and both studies concluded that there are use cases out there that are getting very close, including last mile delivery, but also some versions of air taxi or air metro and some early use cases in the medical field. And NASA took those recommendations, and now they've invested very, very heavily. They are creating what they're calling a 2045 vision. This is aimed at trying to, we have airspace as it is today, commercial airspace divided into different classes. It's really not built very well or designed very well for on-demand access, and especially by these types of vehicles that may even someday be unmanned or unpiloted on board. And so they're looking with their 2045 vision effort to try to understand what are the requirements that the airspace system needs to be doing by then, in order, not necessarily actually before then, but that's kind of the end state, to